Good afternoon, East Coast. Good morning, West Coast. Good evening, Europe. I started 3.5 minutes early. So people are going to say, what the hell's going on? I got the notification. I'm starting early because Julie has a hard out at 1 o'clock, which means we're going to have 30 minutes with Julie Kelly to go over well more than 30 minutes of absolute mind-blowing injustice of an insanity. Mind-blowing injustice of an insanity. And I want to make the most of that 30 minutes. So we're going to start off earlier than anticipated. Let people trickle in because they're going to get the notification and panic. And I'm going to do the sponsor right off the bat, which is actually going to work out perfectly for everybody, before bringing in Julie at 12:30. So what do we have now? It's 12:27 and change. Julie Kelly, we're going to talk January 6th convictions. They are excessive beyond any measure of political bias. Julie Kelly is going to be out at 1 o'clock. François Amalega is going to come on at about 1:15, give or take. We're going to go to Rumble for that. Follow up on François Amalega, see what's going on in the batshit crazy asylum of Quebec and Canada. Not that the rest of the world is much better, and that's what we're going to do. But I know you saw as you came in, it said this thing contains a paid promo. Yes, people. I haven't sold out because I actually use this stuff in as much as any man is going to admit using skin products. But we need to get past that bias because taking care of your skin is a good thing. If I look younger, if I don't look 44 years old, despite the weight of the world breaking my back and shoulders and giving me wrinkles and gray hair, maybe it has to do with the retinol. Maybe it has to do with if you can't cry, laugh, and that's how we deal with this. But let me. I think I should probably stick to the script this time. Do you think your face enjoyed the summer as much as you did? Ladies and gentlemen, here's Ella from Rockford, Illinois. I can't stick to script. I'm going to read a testimonial from Ella from Rockford, Illinois. I have not vetted Ella from Rockford, Illinois, but I trust Genucel as a company. I have both age and acne spots, and this stuff is actually fading both of them. The serum is worth every penny. She's raving about the spot corrector from Genucel. Talked about it a little while ago. The retinol thing that firms up your skin. You can use it if you go outside and put suntan lotion on. I'm going to have to skip a little over the script here, but they have a package which you're looking at right now. I did my due diligence into the company. I talked with the doctor. I think it was, I want to say Dr. Mike, but I might have forgotten his name. I wanted to get familiar with the company, make sure it is a legit company, that the product is good, and I use it as well. An American story, for those who don't know. An Egyptian pharmacist comes to America, starts his own pharmacy, has his own proprietary brand of product. Skin cream, gives it to his customers at his pharmacy. They say, we want more, and thus a business is born. Made in America, out of New Jersey, I think, 50 some odd employees, sponsors of the New Jersey Devil. They have great skincare products. Dr. Drew, his wife, use it and love it. I'm not much into skincare, but my wife says I should be because we moved to Florida, at least temporarily. Lots of sun. You got to keep your skin looking young, tight, firm, etc., etc. I don't care about that. I care about what's in the head, but there's nothing wrong with making sure that you take care of your skin. So go to genucel.com, promo code VIVA. You'll get 70% off the most popular package, which has got the retinol stuff and spot remover. And it's this package that you're looking at right here. Great company, great product, great testimonials, and thus ends the promo. Now I see Julie in the back and we're 12:30 on the nose. Oh boy, people, I saw some people saying, oh, I don't want to get my blood pressure up. We're going to have high blood pressure today together and get the latest, the details from Julie, who's covering January 6th like nobody else, gets the transcripts of the court hearings, covering the Trump indictments. She's amazing. Julie_Kelly. There might be a 2 in there, but the link to Julie Kelly on Twitter is there. Julie, are you ready to come in? Yes. Okay. Hold on. Now I got to go add to stage. Julie, how goes the battle?
It's ongoing, and I'm afraid it might be a losing battle, but we're not giving up yet.
Well, I mean, it all depends on when you start and stop the measurements. Right now, it's losing beyond anybody's wildest dreams. It's injustices that, like I said on Twitter this morning, they make people sympathetic, or it will make people sympathetic to the Proud Boys, to the Oath Keepers, even if they might have otherwise had a negative impression of them. If you could, I mean, just tell us what the latest is. I feel like I just want to let you talk for 30 minutes. Tell us what the latest is on January 6th. The Proud Boys that were just convicted, sentenced to 17 and 13 years respectively. The environment, the judge, the hearings. Tell us what's going on.
I mean, it's hard to really put into words exactly what has happened in this trial, in this case, for more than 2.5 years. I've covered it pretty extensively. It was handled by Judge Timothy J. Kelly, a Trump appointed judge who claimed to be a conservative, but has acted as nothing more than a rubber stamp for this Department of Justice's abusive, vengeful, and destructive prosecution of Trump supporters. And of course, that was the case with the Proud Boys. Judge Tim Kelly not only denied release of these men, held them behind bars for nearly 2 years before their trial started. Judge Tim Kelly also refused to move this trial out of Washington, D.C., even though, Viva, it happened at the very same time that the January 6th committee was conducting televised national hearings, specifically mentioning these very defendants. As jury selection was going on in Washington, D.C. in late December of 2022, the January 6th committee released its report mentioning the Proud Boys over 100 times and claiming that they were working in tandem with Donald Trump to attack the Capitol on January 6th and overthrow the government. There was so much conflict of interest. As you know, DC is almost 100% Democrat. They're really the only city paying attention, blow by blow, what's happening with the January 6th investigation in the committee. But yet he refused to defend the rights of these defendants, which is his job. He's a former federal prosecutor in the very same DC U.S. Attorney's Office, now handling every January 6th case. He worked on cases. He's buddies with one of the top prosecutors on this case. His wife works for DC Mayor Muriel Bowser. He is so compromised, and it was evident throughout this trial. So not only did he let the government get away with whatever they wanted, now he has imposed a total of 82 years in prison for 5 Proud Boys. Of course, the highest sentence being 22 years for Enrique Tarrio, who is not even in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. This is a travesty of justice, but just an escalation of what's been happening in this January 6th prosecution since early 2021.
Okay, so we'll back this up just to flesh out a few things. Enrique Tarrio at one point was called an FBI informant or was working with the FBI. He has been, along with the other Proud Boy co-defendants, in pretrial detention up until now for the last, give or take, 2 years.
Enrique Tarrio actually was arrested a year after the other defendants, but to your point, Joseph Biggs, who was sentenced to 17 years in prison, Ethan Nordeen, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison. And this is based on seditious conspiracy. They didn't assault police officers. They didn't damage government property or destroy anything. They didn't bring weapons to the Capitol. Ethan Nordeen actually is on video walking through an open door with at least 5 Capitol police officers standing right there. Nonetheless, Judge Tim Kelly has denied their release repeatedly, held them in pretrial detention for 2 years before their trial started in January of 2020, January of this year.
Okay. Conviction on seditious conspiracy. I'm going to bring this question up because I think I understand the point of it, and the point is who built the gallows for Pence. Okay. I would venture to say who cares, and even if you found the person, you don't put anyone in jail for 22 years for what is arguably First Amendment rights, even if it might cross a bit of a line. But Julie, so these guys, they are convicted on seditious conspiracy by a jury of their peers. For those who don't know, DC 95+% pro-Democrat, pro-Clinton.
And the people seated on this jury, there was actually a deep dive into this on Lawfare blog of all places. At least 8 of them told the prosecution and the judge that they had been involved in left-wing demonstrations over the past few years, including, March for Women, gun control, demonstrations. Not a single one was tied to the political right. Nonetheless, they were seated on this jury, came back with quick convictions of seditious conspiracy. Now, let's talk really quick about seditious conspiracy. It is a joke to try to prove this is a Civil War era statute. No American before January 6th, this prosecution has been convicted. We now have close to, I think, 15 convictions or plea deals. Here's how low the bar is. To use by force to prevent, hinder, or delay a government proceeding. Not only that, the jury instructions said that the agreement to a conspiracy doesn't even have to be verbal. It can be a wink and a nod. It can happen at the moment that the whatever sedition happened. It's so vague, intentionally vague, so dubious that of course the jury would come back with a conviction, because it basically meant Ethan Nordeen and Joe Biggs could have looked at each other, shaken a fence, and all of a sudden that's seditious conspiracy and an act of terrorism. That's exactly what has happened in this case. So this is the sort of travesty that's been, as I said, been happening. But I think some people now are waking up to the extreme measures that this DOJ and federal judges will take to punish people who supported Donald Trump and protested Joe Biden's election that day.
I'm going to bring it back up just one more time, just so we'll read it in real time. I've read it prior here. If two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States. I mean, it sounds like everyone who was involved in Kavanaugh hearings were guilty of the same thing. Or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to they shall be each fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 20 years or both. We're going to get to the over 20-year sentences. I think I remembered 5, maybe a few people had ever been charged with seditious conspiracy, but these are the first convictions in the history of America.
For Americans, this is a statute that was reserved for foreign terrorists. For example, the blind sheikh and several of his co-conspirators, co-terrorists, were convicted of seditious conspiracy for trying to blow up the World Trade Center, and in the process killing 5 Americans and injuring dozens more. This is the sort of statute that is supposed to be applied to those people, not for people who organized, planned to go to the nation's capital, who breached a few exterior barriers, who shook a metal fence. That's not what this is intended for. So this is very dangerous precedent that is being set. And Republicans are totally out to lunch on this, because we now have a whole new long list of federal crimes of terrorism, including seditious conspiracy, obstruction of an official proceeding, and yes, shaking a temporary metal fence, even if you weren't in the city, because that's how Enrique Tarrio got his terror enhancement from Judge Kelly.
We're going to get to the terror enhancements and Enrique Tarrio. The convictions on the seditious conspiracy, okay, how did they get to these wild sentences? I mean, it has to do with the terrorist enhancements to the charges?
Right. So that's part of it. So there are convictions for seditious conspiracy, obstruction of an official proceeding, also a felony punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Then there were added enhancements. Well, you obstructed justice. Well, you obstructed Congress. But the big one was the the terror enhancement. And Judge Kelly said, well, because you were involved in the destruction of government property, the shaking of a metal fence, that he said, my hands are tied. This is what the statute says, so I have to add this enhancement. Well, what the defense counsel was arguing last week, I was in the courtroom, is look, this usually means blowing up government buildings, right? It means trying to blow up, say the federal building in Oklahoma City. Doesn't mean shaking a metal fence where there's also dozens of other people you don't even know who are doing the same thing. So when the defense counsel said, look, not only is this reserved for destruction of government property, meaning buildings or facilities or military installations, or using weapons of mass destruction, or plotting a mass casualty event, the lead prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jason McCullough, argued the point that, well, yes, loss of life is bad, but this also rises to the same standard as an event like 9/11, which of course we've seen judges and prosecutors compare January 6th to. So I don't think people really grasp the gravity of what's happening in these courtrooms and what these people are saying when our own government is arguing and turning otherwise peaceful protesters, people who have worked with law enforcement, by the way. Enrique Tarrio was an FBI informant 10 years ago. Joseph Biggs was meeting with the FBI to tell them their plans to fight Antifa and BLM. They were working with law enforcement up to that point, including an official with the Metropolitan Police Department. So who tries to overthrow the government, brings no weapons, and is talking with the FBI and local police about it? So they were definitely, roped into this operation, and now they'll spend, a lot more time in prison.
How many days did you spend in the courthouse listening to this in person?
So last week I was there for 2 days. the first sentencing hearing was canceled by Judge Kelly. He called in sick, believe it or not. So I missed one day that I planned to be out there. But I was there for at least one of the sentences. But I have been out there the past several months following and covering the 4-month trial, keeping up with all the court motions. And keep in mind, too, recall, numerous FBI informants were embedded in this group months before January 6th. And you had an FBI informant who told the court and the government that there was no pre-planning to do anything on January 6th. I mean, these guys stopped at a food truck before they got to the Capitol. They had a party planned at 3:00 the afternoon with the band. Were they going to go to the food truck and then overthrow the government with no weapons and then go have a party afterwards in Washington, D.C.? This is the sort of insane case that this DOJ brought, that the D.C. jury bought hook, line, and sinker, and that Judge Kelly now considers acts of terrorism.
I mean, there are two absurdities either way on this. You know, the FBI was involved in the seditious conspiracy, infiltrated. That's how they got the conviction, both for the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, I believe. If the FBI were involved and knew of this plot for seditious conspiracy on January 6th, and simultaneously claims we had no idea this was going to happen, we were understaffed, that's how they took over the building, those are two mutually incompatible thoughts that cannot be held at the same time. The idea that Enrique Tarrio was not even there, and then nonetheless found guilty of seditious conspiracy, which means whatever it means, how he was sentenced to 17 years, not 22? No, he was sentenced to 22.
Enrique Tarrio was sentenced to 22. Ethan Nordeen was sentenced to 18 years. Joseph Biggs was sentenced to 17 years. Zachary Reel, another defendant, sentenced to 12 years. And Dominic Pizzola, who is the only defendant not convicted of seditious conspiracy in this trial, nonetheless has been in prison for 30 months already and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was the one seen using a riot shield to smash the window. You know, certainly nothing we would approve of, but nothing that should keep him in pretrial detention for almost 3 years and then a 10-year prison sentence in addition to that.
When I do the Sunday nights with Barnes and he says, you know, they're creating rules which they don't know how they're going to come back and bite them in the butt. That presumes honesty and integrity in terms of being victims to the system. I think they're not fearing that because they don't enforce the rules the same way. You got the guy using a shield to break a window. Okay, naughty. I don't know how much that should be worth. But then you got the Molotov cocktail lawyers out of New York. Molotov cocktail a police car during a protest, and they got, well, at least one of them got a year and a day. They got disbarred. I'm not sure if the disbarment was. It's not applying the law equally, and even if it were to apply this to them, I would still object because this is outlandish. I mean, when the judge sentences this, does he look guilty? Does he look like he feels bad, or does he look proud about what he's doing?
Look, Judge Tim Kelly just put himself in the history books. He's proud. He is, he's now a famous figure. When the history books are written on January 6th, Judge Tim Kelly, who is nothing more than a line prosecutor at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office and then a staffer for Senate Judiciary Committee, I suspect that that's how he got his judgeship. Now he's going to be the most famous judge tied to January 6th. They're going to talk about how he condemned these men. I mean, he actually mocked Enrique Tarrio yesterday and scolded him for comparing one of the Proud Boys to George Washington, saying that you defamed George Washington by comparing. Well, who are you to say what Enrique Tarrio can post in a private group chat, or even if he announced it to the world? This was a First Amendment case. This is what the defense attorneys made all along. But again, as we continue this march towards criminalizing free speech, criminalizing political activity, criminalizing now objecting to a rigged election, this is just one more, I think, giant leap in our march towards, really Marxist banana republic style territory.
Have you been speaking with counsel for the defendants?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and actually tonight I will host a Twitter Spaces at 6:45 Eastern Time with Stephen Metcalf, who is one of the Proud Boys defense attorneys. He represented Dominic Pizzola. So he will take questions and he will explain how this terror enhancement sentences work. And I think he'll have lots to say about how this case unfolded.
Have they? I mean, I know it's appeals without question, but have they explained the process? What the likelihood of overturning? Because you're going to have a number of legal issues to overturn. One is the conviction of its own, and then is going to be the sentencing and the terrorist enhancements. Has defense talked about the appeal at all, or other than alluding to it will happen?
It will happen, and you cannot appeal until your client is sentenced. Mm-hmm. So I believe that those appeals will be coming in short order. So they will appeal a number of things, including errors during the entire process made by Judge Kelly, things that he allowed, things that he didn't allow. Get this, here's one example. This killed me the most, is that Judge Tim Kelly, former federal prosecutor, told defense attorneys they had to pre-clear questions under cross-examination of government witnesses related to the use of FBI informants. They had to pre-clear. This is totally inimical to the adversarial, climate of a federal trial. Judge Tim Kelly gave not just a rubber stamp, was an extra prosecutor on the government's team. Who says pre-clear your cross-examination questions with your adversaries? But this is just one example of his egregious mishandling of this case. Not only that, the jury instructions, the bogusness of the seditious conspiracy, the obstruction of an official proceeding, which is headed towards the Supreme Court anyway, and of course, the ridiculous, absurd use of the terror enhancement at sentencing.
The pre-clearing of the questions, that can go two ways. Which way did it go? Did it say just give us the questions beforehand so we can make sure none of them cross a line? Or if any of them do cross the line, you don't even get to ask them?
Right. I think it was, we will tell you whether you can use these questions at trial. We'll tell you whether you can question this witness about FBI informants in front of the jury. So that's exactly what happened. And every time they got towards exposing more of the FBI, not just the use of informants, but also corruption by the FBI, withholding documents and information, Judge Kelly would step in and referee and, choose the government side.
Unbelievable. So Judge Kelly was presiding over the case for all of those Proud Boy defendants. The sentence comes from the judge, not from the jury, obviously. And some of the wildest sentences we've ever seen, not for this type of crime, for this type of conduct, which is essentially, as I think you're not wrong to point out, it's First Amendment stuff. It's like texting over the violence, maybe not, but even still, I mean, you compare it to the BLM Summer of Love, you compare it to January 2017, you compare it to the Kavanaugh hearings. There's no comparing. One is an overt political injustice. How doom-pilled are you? I know it's tough to remain even mildly optimistic, but what is your thinking going forward? Where do you see this going?
I mean, I do feel like these defense attorneys are going to file very strong appeals. It just depends on where it goes from there. We had what's called a splintered ruling out of the DC appellate court for the obstruction of an official proceeding. So a count and the use of that count against more than 300 now January 6th defendants, trying to turn this post-Enron statute that has to do with tampering with witness and evidence into a crime for political protest. So I think a lot of this eventually is, I'm not so confident about the DC circuit, although there was a very favorable ruling. They smacked down the use of what's called a dual sentence for people accused of the most petty offense, parading. These judges were imposing both prison time and probation. Mm-hmm. DC Circuit came back and said, no, you're not allowed to do that. They knew they weren't allowed to do it, by the way, but they thought they were going to get away with it. So, but it will be years before this is all sorted out at the Supreme Court level. In the meantime, the lives of these men, their families, completely destroyed, bankrupted. Families have been broken up. Marriages have been broken up. Businesses have been lost. I mean, there is a real human toll here that goes beyond a prison sentence.
And I don't give a sweet bugger all about YouTube. Four of the defendants or four of the accused committed suicide?
At least 4 January 6 defendants have committed suicide, including last week, the suicide, I'm told by a source very close to the case, suicide of a 22-year-old young man who was 19 at the time, went to the Capitol with his uncle, was inside the building for less than 10 minutes, didn't assault anyone, didn't bring a weapon. The only thing that he brought into the Capitol was a Trump flag. And of course, that is why he was going to be charged, his life ruined. And instead of facing the consequences that so many January 6 defendants have, he, like people like Matthew Perna, Mark Ongst, others, took his life instead of being tormented and tortured by this Department of Justice.
Okay. And now, so that's January 6th. You're following the Trump stuff as well, the Trump indictments in Georgia and DC, or just are you focusing on the DC?
I'm mostly focusing on the January 6th indictment and the classified documents case in Southern Florida. I was following a little bit of the Georgia case, but there's only one person. And so, yes, I'm mostly still focused on January 6th.
No, because I say like you're deep diving into this like nobody else, because you're ordering the transcripts of the hearings and to capture what the judge says in court that you can't record. Tell us a little bit about the Trump DC January 6th indictment.
Well, so there's 4 counts currently pending against Donald Trump. He has, unfortunately, Judge Tanya Chutkan, an Obama appointee, who is handling this case, already creating a lot of problems. I have a whole deep dive into her handling of January 6 cases. She's well known and has bragged about, incarcerating, overcharging, over sentencing January 6 defendants. She has hinted in previous hearings that Donald Trump should be charged. She went along with one defendant who tried to blame Donald Trump for his conduct, said, yes, but I'm not in charge of charging decisions. So hinting that, yes, Donald Trump should have been indicted for January 6th. So unfortunately, and by the way, she did compare January 6th to 9/11 and the Boston Marathon bombing. So Trump is in real legal jeopardy simply because this case is being handled in Washington, D.C. But Jack Smith still has his D.C. grand jury working on January 6 matters. I think it's supposed to expire next week. I'm sure he will get that extended. So I don't think he's done with Donald Trump. And this is why the Proud Boys convictions, headlines, sentences tie to Donald Trump, because the Department of Justice, these prosecutors, made Donald Trump a key figure in this prosecution, said that the actual date, the start of the conspiracy, began on December 19th, 2020, when Trump tweeted out, "Come to DC on January 6th, will be wild." The government used that as the starting date and basically the launching pad for this alleged seditious conspiracy. The judge brought up Donald Trump numerous times last week in his pre-sentencing hearing. The DOJ brought up Donald Trump during their closing arguments back in April. So I fully expect Jack Smith to use these convictions, these sentences, especially the terror enhancement, to eventually bring additional charges against Donald Trump. And of course, we still have 6 unindicted co-conspirators: Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Johnny Eastman, the villains list of Trump world that we're still waiting for Jack Smith to lower the hammer on them as well.
It's an interesting thing you say about like the conspiracy, the seditious conspiracy starting in December. And now that you mention it, during the trial of the Proud Boys, it sent like, through hook or by crook, they got the defendants to say, yeah, I was just, abiding by what I thought Trump wanted. It's sort of like what I said was the I love Big Brother type admissions. Did they, in fact, was that the extent of, or an element of their defense, like we were just doing what we thought it was Trump who motivated us to do this? And did you get the feeling that this was done out of coercion to, be able to make the argument stronger against Donald Trump later on?
There were 2 defense attorneys, I believe, in closing arguments who did bring up Donald Trump, basically that he was the source or he was the instigator for this seditious conspiracy. So I'm sure Jack Smith has that fully armed. Now, keep in mind also, though, last week, Dominic Pizzola, the window smasher, when he left court after being sentenced to 10 years in prison, yelled Trump won as he left the courtroom. So he certainly was not buying into the blame Trump line. But sure, this has been a defense of quite a few January 6th defendants trying to blame Trump. Now, the judges have tossed that out of court, by the way, including Judge Chutkan. So I'm not sure how that will resolve itself if and when Jack Smith brings these additional possibly seditious conspiracy counts. But yes, they have tried to attempted to blame Donald Trump for what happened.
Most shocking things that you can recall offhand? You have to have at least a few that come to mind right away.
Listening to Judge Kelly in that courtroom, he gave a 3-hour oral ruling last week. And I was sitting in the courtroom and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. how he thought he was basically repeating the government's case, citing things that we know were not even produced by the Proud Boys, including a document that he called a roadmap to January 6th that was produced by a former Intel asset and sent to a girlfriend of Enrique Tarrio, and he never even opened it. He didn't produce it. He didn't author it. He didn't even read it. So just sitting there listening to him just give the government's blow by blow account of what happened in the Proud Boys' involvement, not a single ounce of skepticism from this judge. And as one defense attorney said to me after this 3-hour oral ruling, he said, what you just saw there was the end of a once great country. Because he recognized, as anyone else who is sitting there listening or has followed this case or has followed this prosecution, what this all means for our short-term and long-term future.
That's very, very, very dark and doom-pilled. That might not, there's no silver lining to that. Have you seen the defendants or spoken to the defendants at all?
I mean, I saw the defendants. I haven't spoken to them. I do keep in touch with some of the defense attorneys. It was heartbreaking to see them in court. They're broken men. They're in orange jumpsuits. They're being treated as terrorists by the government and by the media and by, at least half the country. So it was really distressing to see them, and especially to see their family members who were there. I mean, I saw one father, sobbing, saying he doesn't want to die with his son in jail. So these are very difficult things to see. They are just human collateral in the DOJ Biden regime's war on terror against the American right. And keep in mind, too, 3 of these men are veterans. Joe Biggs is a Purple Heart veteran. I mean, they served their country. Joe Biggs, especially honorably. They've lost their military benefits. They are now, outcasts in their community, even in their family, by their family. So it's really tough to see that side of it as well.
What do you have next on the? So you have the Twitter Spaces tonight at 6:45. I know you've got another hit at 1 o'clock, so we'll get it. We'll wind this up.
We've got like 5 more today. That's okay. I'm glad we made this work, though.
No, I'm glad. I mean, it's people need to hear this. It upsets me that people don't realize just how atrocious this is. I'll share an anecdote when we end this about one of these convictions that I had last night. Where can people find you?
Thanks so much. So my Substack is Declassified with Julie Kelly. As you know, I'm on Twitter a ton, posting breaking news and court motions, transcripts, Julie_Kelly 2, and then Truth Social at Julie_Kelly. And thank you so much you've been covering my work since the very beginning, you and Robert. So I'm very grateful.
Well, I don't have the, I'm not going to Washington. I'm certainly I can't even imagine going into the courthouse and doing this, day in and day out, the way you're doing it. It's amazing. So I got to pick and choose where I can get the overview from people who are doing the deeper dives, and you're doing amazing stuff. So, Julie, let's do this. Whenever you want to come back on, open-ended invitation.
I will certainly let you know. Thanks again for having me on. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Okay. The same. See you soon. Oh, it makes me want to cry, actually. I cry out of frustration, sometimes cry out of sadness, cry during commercials. It's atrocious. And I'll share an anecdote, and it doesn't matter who it was with. It doesn't matter where it happened. I was talking with someone and noticed that they were from Michigan. And then I said, oh, you're from Michigan. You're following the trial that's going on now for the Gretchen Whitmer part 3 of the kidnapping trial. And the person is not as deeply involved and deeply engrossed by all of this as I am. And said, no. It's like, oh, well, part 3 of the trial is coming on. And then the person's like, yeah, well, they're all guilty. And it's like, ugh. I said, look, it would be very hard for anybody to watch that trial and see the evidence that's being presented in chief prosecution and not come to the conclusion that they're guilty. I mean, it's like the evidence is bad. The only question is but for the involvement of these many agents, these many informants, would they have ever gotten to this point in time? It was actually the damningest piece of evidence that they're showing in the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot is the drive-by of Whitmer's cottage, and from what I've been told on good intelligence, it was the FBI informants who brought them there. So you get a bunch of vulnerable individuals, downtrodden, living in literally basements of vacuum shops, eating and washing their hands and brushing their teeth in the restaurant bathroom next door. And you get the FBI, to some extent, arguably manufacturing these criminals out of thin air. And there was the terrorist one that we covered 2 weeks ago with Robert Barnes, where the judge said the entrapment in this case was like a made-for-movie, how the FBI creates the criminals as opposed to foils the plots. And so after talking about Whitmer, it goes into the recent convictions. And this person was of good faith and just wildly ill-informed, but unaware of the degree to which he or she was ill-informed, says, oh yeah, they got what they deserved, finally got some of those insurrectionists convicted. And I'm like, I don't even expect the rules to be applied evenly to both sides. I think no one's above the law, but some people are under the law. I don't think even the left has to worry about these laws being weaponized against them because, like some people say, it's the seizure of power without any aspiration of ever relinquishing it. But the insurrectionists, even if that's what you consider them to be, who did nothing more and a lot less than the BLM Summer of Love. Oh, but that wasn't politically motivated. That was socially driven in response to whatever. What they did during Kavanaugh hearings, disrupting the Kavanaugh hearings. What they did in, where was it? Those two people who got removed from office for the gun protest on the floor of the House, Wisconsin? I don't think it was Wisconsin. There is no world that is a free, democratic republic, whatever the distinction you guys want to make, that can justify these sentences. Period, full stop. And I'm noticing an evolution in real time. Once upon a time, I said, pardon all of the non-violent January 6 offenders because you don't tolerate violence regardless. Well, I am now have seen how even those who deserve maybe some punishment, just and proportionate punishment, have been abused by a politicized system where now even those people who might have otherwise been rightly sentenced to a proportionate sentence have been absolutely abused and violated by a politicized, weaponized system. They need to be pardoned as well. And Vivek, from what I understand, is saying it. And he might be the only GOP running for the primaries other than Trump. Well, Trump hasn't really said it yet. They're going to just... It feels like the end of the system. Oh, it was Georgia, Tom says. Constitutional republic. Yes, I for the sake of discussion, I understand the distinction, but and as Barnes and I have discussed, for the sake of the discussion, as the terms are being used, democracy is interchangeable with constitutional republic, although there are different modalities of how they fit how they work. Okay, now let me see here. We're going to go over to Rumble. Let me just tell François Amalega that we are good to go. We are good to go when you're ready to join. Okay, what we're going to do right now, people, because I didn't want to interfere. The 30 minutes was short and it goes fast. I didn't want to interfere with Julie Kelly giving us the latest. Come on over to Rumble. The link is there. We'll cover some other stuff. I've been posting some highlights of the ADL madness because it seems a lot of people don't quite know how insane the ADL has been. But we'll talk about some other stuff. So what we're going to do right now, ending on YouTube, come over to Rumble where the party shall continue. And then after that, we're going to go over to Locals and have the Locals after party. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to end on YouTube, come over to Locals, Rumble or Locals. You know what? Actually, remind myself. Here's the link to Locals where we've got a nice crowd. Come over to Locals or Rumble. But we're ending on YouTube in 5, 4, 3, 2.